Hello, everybody. Very good morning. This is Roshan here. Thank you for taking out time and joining the session. We'll wait for another minute or two so that everybody can join in, and then we will begin the session. So please stay online for another minute or two, just so that all the attendees are able to join, and then we'll kickstart the session. Thank you. Okay, so thank you everyone for your patience. Let's get started. Let me go ahead and change it to presentation mode. Okay, so welcome everyone for today's session. It's the first webinar of our Azure Accelerate series. And today we'll be looking at introduction to Microsoft Azure, and let's look at the agenda that we have in store for today. We'll quickly look at an overview of Microsoft Azure, what Microsoft Azure is made up of, what are the various components in Microsoft Azure. Then we'll go into a deep dive into one of the major pillars of Microsoft Azure, which is infrastructure as a service. We'll look at the various components in infrastructure as a service, how they work together, how they operate, what are the various functionality and options that they give. Then we'll look at some of the options of how you can combine Azure services and features to what your customers are already using. So as Ingram Micro, as a value-added distributor, we have built several package solutions or bundle solutions with Microsoft Azure, and we'll be giving you a very high-level overview of each of these packages. In the upcoming webinar series, we will be going into more detail about these various bundle solutions or packages and the scenarios of how you can sell them to your customers. We'll also, at the end, look at how Ingram Micro can help you sell better, mainly Microsoft Azure. We'll talk about some programs that we are running on Microsoft Azure and how you can make benefit of it. At any point of time, if you have any questions, feel free to put your questions on the chat. I will be looking at all the questions during the end of the session. And if time permits, if we have some time left at the end, we'll also have a quick demo of Microsoft Azure, and we'll try to see the various components of whatever we spoke during the presentation in the demo as well, and get you a better understanding of how Azure works and how the various components speak with each other. So with no further ado, let's get started. Before I begin, a quick introduction about myself. My name is Roshan. I work as a solution architect with Ingram Micro. I've been associated with Ingram Micro for over 2.5 years. I'm mainly an infrastructure consultant. I don't do a lot of development or I don't work with a lot of Visual Studio. I have worked on various other cloud platforms as well, including AWS, Office 365, and I started my career with SharePoint. So I have worked with SharePoint technologies right from SharePoint 2007 all the way to SharePoint 2016. If you want to get in touch with me, you can always send me a LinkedIn connect, and we can definitely discuss about your scenarios on LinkedIn, or you can always drop me an email. My email address is firstname.lastname@ingrammicro.com. So feel free to drop me an email, and I'll be more than happy to assist with any of your questions. So let's get started. The very first question is, what is Azure? This is the definition that Microsoft has published, but to put it in simple English, in simple context, Microsoft as an organization uh, have data centers which they build, they own, and they have built these data centers across the world. Now, these data centers don't just contain one or 10 servers, they contain thousands of servers. And these servers have several features and functionalities configured in them. What Microsoft Azure is exposing these features and functionalities to partners and customers so that they can use all these high scale compute or scalability that they get by accessing the server spread all across the world. So it's nothing but a connected data centers providing you several features and functionalities. And the best part is you can pick and choose the services, the server, the components that you want to make use of. You don't need to build and own the data center. You don't have the headache of making sure the services or server is always up and running. That is something Microsoft takes care of. All you need to worry about, can I access the machine? Can I access my service? Can I push and pull using the REST API? So this is what you worry about, and this is what you finally end up building on Microsoft Azure. So that is what Azure in simple English or a nutshell is. Now, as I said, Microsoft has several data centers. This is a pictorial representation of the various data centers that they have. Within Australia, there are 4 data centers. They have named it as Southeast, Central, Central 2, and East. Uh, it's primarily located, southeast is the one that's located near the Melbourne. Australia Central is close to Canberra. Australia East is close to Sydney. So these are 4 different data centers that Microsoft has within Australian region. So the good part is you get one of the best latencies. Last time I checked, the latency for some of the data center was less than 100 milliseconds, which is as close to what you can get on a LAN network, right? So you can pretty much have any application, right, from your uh, business critical applications such as an ERP, an Oracle database, or an SAP HANA system, or simple applications such as a website or an e-commerce portal or an attendance system. Any of these things can run on top of Azure. The best part is if you are a multinational company and you have customers spread all across the globe, you can, from Azure portal, deploy resources to any of the other regions that you see on the screen. So just because you're a partner based in Australia does not mean you have access only to the Australian data centers. You have access to every region where Azure is available. We do have partners and customers who have their customers in US, in UK, in India, and in Australia, and they want to make sure that the users from various regions access the server which is closest to them. Azure provides this functionality. So we using the same control panel or the portal, you can deploy resources to any region where Microsoft has its data center. We also spoke about the various features and functionalities that Microsoft gives. Now, I cannot include all the features into this slide, but this is a very good overview of the various features and functionalities that Microsoft Azure has to offer. It has infrastructure services such as compute, storage, networking, something that we'll go into more deep today. It also provides you several security management features. If you actually look at some of the articles that Microsoft has published on security, Microsoft provides you up to 7 layers of security, right from the time a user request hits the internet and then traverses towards the resource within Azure. It can be protected at 7 different layers. So that is the level of security options that is available by Microsoft. If you compare the security options provided by Microsoft and any other service providers in the market, Microsoft probably stands at the top when it comes to giving you the security features and functionalities. It also has several platform services. So, organizations who are into mobile development, app development, data analytics, integration with various other uh, products, if you're into containerization, serverless technology, these are all various features that are available within Azure. It also provides you hybrid connectivity, which is probably the most used uh, functionality of Azure. We have up to 80-90% of our customers and partners deploy hybrid features with Azure, where they still have some resources running on-prem, uh, some of the resources running on Azure, but they want to have a seamless experience between these two. So Azure provides this hybrid functionality. And since Azure and your on-prem are all using Microsoft technology, this hybrid functionality works seamless. That is one of the biggest selling points as a vendor that Microsoft brings onto the table. As part of today's session, we will be covering more onto the infrastructure as a service components. And if you have any questions around the other platform services, feel free to get in touch with me. I will do my best to answer your questions and help you out with your queries. So let's dive deeper into Azure Infrastructure as a Service. Let's see what are the core components that make a cloud service model. I'm sure most of you have seen this slide. The leftmost is the traditional on-prem data center. This is something that we have been building for over a decade now, right? So a customer has a requirement, we order a server, it takes X number of days to be delivered. Once it is there, we start off with network, right? We make sure we create network, subnets, then us start assigning IP addresses, then attach a storage to it, create servers, virtualization such as VMware, Hyper-V can be used to virtualize the hardware, and then we start creating either Windows machines or Linux machines, then install applications. So this is something that we have been doing for many, many years now. When cloud was introduced, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service were born. I'm sure everybody knows what software as a service is. Classic examples such as Office 365, Gmail, Hotmail, Salesforce, Dropbox. All these are examples of software as a service. In software as a service, you don't really care about what hardware is the service being provided by, whether you need to manage and maintain any of the service. No, all you need is a username and password to access that service, right? Hence, you do not take care of anything when it comes to software as a service. The only item which you take care of is your data only, right? So whatever you load onto a software as a service platform like Salesforce or Dropbox, if you upload data, if you upload customer information, you have complete control and complete access to this data, but you don't need to worry about what OS is it running, what virtualization technology are they using, what integration have they done. You don't need to really worry about that. Platform as a service is another example of cloud service model. Uh, some of the examples for platform as a service is SQL database as a service. You have Postgres as a service, HD Insight as a service, right? Website hosting. right? GoDaddy is a classic again example of platform as a service. So here again, you do not need to really worry about am I running on a Linux server, a Windows server, am I running on a 2 GB RAM or a 50 GB RAM? All you worry is my website running? Am I getting the right access to deploy my HTML and CSS code? And is the website running? That's it, right? So the level of control you get is a little more when it comes to platform as a service, because you're able to control, tweak changes to your website, your database, the kind of queries that you want to run on it. So you get that functionality. Coming to infrastructure as a service. In infrastructure as a service, you get the control right from the operating system. Anything below the operating system is something that you do not have a control of. For example, when I talk more about Azure, you will see that you do not get access to the virtualization platform that Microsoft uses. I'm sure Microsoft is using Hyper-V, they have System Center components running behind it, but you get direct access to the virtual machine. Once you have access to the virtual machine, you decide what OS will it run on, what application will I install it, what kind of security will that virtual machine have. Do I open the ports? Do I open the protocols? How do users access? How do my internal users access? How do my external users access? So you get more and more control when it comes to infrastructure as a service. And the best part is you do not worry about, is the server up and running? Is the network correctly configured? Is the cooling available for it? So you don't need to worry about all these mundane tasks. So all you worry is whether the application is running, whether is the VM patched up correctly, uh, is public IP assigned to it, are my users able to access. So you worry about the actual technology and the value added service that you provide to your end customers when it comes to infrastructure as a service. So the core components involved in infrastructure service is compute, storage, and networking, right? So this is what we would look into more details in the upcoming slides. Like how you build an on-premise data center, right? You always start with the networking. The same case is with Azure as well. Even in Azure, you start off with the networking. You define a virtual network. Now, this virtual network by default has a front-end access or has a public-facing access. Now, remember, I said by default, which means you can always stop this, always restrict this. The same network, which is created in Azure, can also be accessed by your own on-premise network. You can extend your on-premise network to Azure and have a stretched network or a hybrid network connectivity. Microsoft Azure provides you various options to do this. They provide you a site-to-site VPN option or a VPN gateway option. They also provide you a higher dedicated, we can say, line called Express Route. So what are these various components of networking? How do I create these? Can I create a subnet? These are some things that we'll discuss in the upcoming slides. But remember, with Azure also, you start off with the networking. You define a network, you say who can access this network, from where can they access. You have options of conditional access. You can even restrict saying, I want people uh, only from a specific IP range to access resources in the Azure virtual network which I create. So you always have that security layer available to you to protect your applications, to protect the access given to the applications. Looking a little closer into virtual network is nothing but a logical network that you have created uh, in order to go ahead and provide networking components to your resources. So it's isolated, it gives you its own uh, security control. So you always have one of the best security measures. And the good part is each virtual networks do not communicate with each other by default. unless you allow them to, right? Okay. What are the various components within a virtual network that you can create? You can create subnets. How many subnets, that depends on your IP range that you create within it, right? It is very similar to an on-prem. I'm sure most of you have installed and configured on-premise network. It is absolutely the same. The way you define an on-prem network and create subnets for your front end, for your application, for your database, for your DMZ zone, it is the same concept. You can create various subnets. Azure provides you public and private IP addresses, both static and dynamic. Dynamic means that whenever a machine restarts, the IP may change. So there are scenarios where you require the IP not to change. For example, a web server, you do not want the IP to change. Active Directory server, you do not want the IP to change, right? So you can assign it a static IP address and make sure that the IP doesn't get changed. You can create network security groups. What does network security groups mean? In simple English, it is nothing but firewall rules. You can tell from which IP, which protocol is it access is allowed or denied. So you can create these rules. And the best part is you can create these rules on a virtual network level. You can create these rules at a subnet level. You can also define custom routing. This is one of the best features that is available, which is provided for free of cost. Both network security group and custom routing are also known as user defined routes. Both are absolutely free within Azure. User defined routes allow you to define how the data traffic should move. There are a lot of customers today who would want the data from the front end server to be sent to a SIM solution, and then once the data is analyzed in your SIM solution, then the data has to go to your application server. Or you can also define that any data coming into my database server should always come from the application. No request should come from the front end servers. So these custom routes can be easily created within Azure. It also provides you an additional layer of security, such as web application, firewall. It has load balancers. Microsoft has recently introduced something called as Azure Firewall, which is firewall as a service. They also have introduced Azure Front Door, which is a very good feature, especially for customers who would want to host massive e-commerce portal on Azure. And on top of all this, it provides you network monitoring capabilities. So you still get all the analytics of what's happening within your network, right? Azure has now introduced something called as Azure Sentinel, which is an Azure SIM solution, which can read your data packets, which can read what's happening within your application. It can detect any unusual activities on your application and notify the administrators. All these features and functionalities are available within Azure. All you need to do is just enable and configure them. You don't have the headache of installing them, configuring them, managing them, taking care of their high availability. None of these headaches. All you need to do, enable, configure according to your scenario. As you can see on the screen, like the way you create an on-prem network, you have a subnet for front end, a subnet for back end. You have various load balancers within each of them. The same setup, absolutely the same setup, can be deployed on Azure. So what I tell to my customers and partners is, if you can deploy a solution on-prem, you can definitely deploy that solution on Azure. If it works on a Windows server on-prem, it will work on a Windows server on Azure. There is absolutely no difference. The biggest advantage is you don't have the headache of managing those servers, managing the hardware when you do it on Azure. So going into a little more detail, this is one of the frequently asked questions that I get. How do I connect my network to Azure network? Because uh, uh, let's say if you have worked with several customers, they always have some applications which are already running in their network. They have, let's say, a file server, a remote desktop server, SQL with a front-end .NET application. Now they want to move these applications to Azure, but they want to move in batches. They do not want to lift and shift every application at once to Azure, right? So that is where a hybrid connectivity comes in. So for example, let's say the customer wants to move the SQL with the app to Azure, but he wants to continue to run his ERP and his, let's say, RDS server on-prem. How do you get this? This is where the VPN gateway functionality of Azure steps in. The VPN gateway functionality lets you connect your on-premise VPN device to an Azure VPN device. On-prem VPN module today is available in pretty much every known firewall, right? So right from your firewall, you can configure a VPN connection to the Azure network. Like if you have created VPN tunnels between two different branches or from your head office to your branch location, the same connection you would now create between an on-prem network and an Azure network. This is called as site-to-site VPN. Another type of VPN that Microsoft Azure gives is point-to-site VPN. Now, you will have customers who have remote offices where only 3, 4, 5 people are working. They don't necessarily have a firewall set up there, and these users are usually working from home, working from field, so they're always traveling around. How do these users access the applications which are running in Azure? Now, that is where a point to site connection comes in. So, point to site means a laptop to the Azure network. Site to site means an on prem network to an Azure network. So, Microsoft Azure has both these options. So, if you have head office, it's always recommended to have a site to site. For branch offices with less number of people, let's say no firewall setup, you can go with point to site access. The third type of connectivity that Microsoft Azure provides is called Express Route. This is typically for enterprise or I would say organization with more than 1,000, 2,000 users. Express Route is a type of connectivity where you get a dedicated line. You can think of it as a dedicated lease line between your network and Azure data center. So it's a single hop network, which means as soon as the data packet leave your network, the very next hop is the Microsoft data center. So here you get a dedicated line, a dedicated channel between your network and Azure. The speed, of course, is much faster than a site-to-site or a point-to-site connectivity. At the same time, it is not as I would say it is more expensive when you compare to point-to-site or a site-to-site connectivity. Having said that, there are several customers who are using Express Route. A lot of airline industries, banks, government uh, organizations are actually using Express Route because their applications demand that low level of latency. It demands synchronous replication. So if you have customers who really require a high speed network connectivity between uh, Azure and their network, you have three options available: point to site, and express route, depending on what fits their requirement and budget. So I hope everybody has now got a clear understanding of how your network can be connected to Azure, and hopefully got some understanding in terms of what are the various components in Azure networking, the subnet, the IP addresses, the firewall, the monitoring piece of it. So all these, whatever I've spoken so far, are all the features and functionalities available within Azure. If you have a question saying, can I deploy my own custom VPN on Azure? The answer is yes. For instance, I have customers who have a Cisco firewall, which for which they already have licenses, or Dell SonicWare firewall, for which they already have licenses. Can I deploy that on Azure and create a connectivity between my on-prem Cisco and Cisco deployed in Azure? The answer is yes. Most of the firewall vendors have virtual appliance available today. All these virtual appliances is available within Azure Marketplace. You can deploy, you can reuse the license. Again, most of the vendors today also give you the option of BYOL, bring your own license. So you can always deploy your own firewall or VPN modules, which you're comfortable, which you have been working and managing on Azure, and still get the same functionality that Azure provides. Next, looking at the next component, which is compute. Compute is nothing but processor, RAM, and storage, the storage which is assigned to the server, right? Azure has virtual machines which begin from one core, 2 GB RAM, 30 GB hard disk, all the way up to 128 cores, 2 terabyte RAM, and the storage can be exponential. It can go up to 128 terabyte or even more than that, right? So just to make it easy for customers and partners to choose from this various configuration, they have uh, bifurcated or classified these various VMs into different groups. There is an A series VM, there is a P series VM, there is D series VM. Some of them are memory optimized, some of them are storage optimized. Storage optimized are typically used for database because they have higher IOPS. There are even GPU optimized, which means if you are a partner who sell a lot of Autodesk and Adobe, and you have customers who do a lot of rendering, who do a lot of designs for machineries, for buildings, instead of purchasing high-end servers with dedicated graphics card, Azure gives you virtual machines with dedicated graphics card in it, right? Which means you can just start these VMs 8 o'clock in the morning, do all your work, shut it down 6 o'clock in the evening. All the data gets stored on the server, so you have security for it, and you get the best in class graphic designing options available on it. Similarly, there is high performance compute. There are system requirements for vendors such as SAP and Oracle. They need specific processors, they need the number of processors, the number of RAM, um, combination to be exact. So for them, we have high performance computes as well. So depending on your requirement, we can pick and select and choose. As Ingram Micro, we are more than happy to assist you in building a solution by uh, combining various different virtual machines that fit your budget, and also show you options of how you can further optimize the cost of compute on Azure. So Azure, one of the components that consume resources continuously is the compute, because whenever your virtual machine is running on Azure, it is utilizing resources, right? It is utilizing processor, RAM, memory. So whenever your virtual machines are running, it starts adding up to your bill. To reduce and make sure that you save as much as possible, Azure or Microsoft has introduced two options: reserved instance and Azure hybrid benefit. What is reserved instance? Now, let me give you an example. Let's say if you have a customer who wants to migrate to Azure, and he knows that uh, he will, and you know that he'll continue to, of course, use Azure for the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and his workloads typically need to run 24 cross 7. Then Azure has an option where you can reserve the virtual machine for 1 year or 3 year, and since you're reserving the virtual machine, Microsoft gives you an upfront discount of up to 60%, right? Now, depending on the size of the machine, depending on the how big or how small is the processor and the RAM, the discount varies. But typically, it varies anywhere from 25 to about 60, 70%. So a very, very good option to save a lot of money for your customers. And most of the time, what we have seen is customers who run on Azure virtual machines typically run it for 24 cross 7. So it becomes a very valid discussion to have with them, saying that, hey, now that your infrastructure is optimized, is working according to the expectation, let us reserve these VMs and get you that additional discount. The other option is for customers who have Windows Server or SQL Server with software assurance, right? So if you have customers who have been purchasing Windows and SQL under open, now they can purchase under CSP. And if you already have customers who have licenses with software assurance, they can reuse those Windows and SQL licenses on Azure, and they will get an additional discount on the Azure cost, the compute cost, right? So these are the two options. Always have them on back of your mind when you're discussing with your customers. See which scenario fits them, and you can always propose them a better pricing option and reduce their cost also. Some of the other components that are available as part of the Azure Compute, virtual machine scale set. This is a very interesting concept. Let's say a quick example is if you have a customer who is hosting an e-commerce platform. Now, an e-commerce platform is not heavily accessed during weekdays, but let's say during weekends or during holiday season, a lot of people start accessing an e-commerce site. A typical example, let's say eBay, right? When eBay comes out with its own promotion offers or weekend offers, there's a lot more traffic. So you do not, the customer doesn't necessarily need to buy enough infrastructure beforehand to take care of his peak load. What virtual machine scale set do is, as the load on the server increases, it automatically creates multiple servers of the same spec, of the same configuration, and the load gets distributed. And as and when the number of requests reduce, the virtual machine automatically start decommissioning themselves or start shutting down themselves. That is one of the beauties of virtual machine scale set. Microsoft has now introduced Azure Dedicated Host, which means you can now reserve an entire physical server itself. So far, when we were talking about Azure Compute, we always spoke about virtual machine. But with Azure Dedicated Host, you get a full server, a physical server just given to you with no other customer's virtual machine or service running on it. You can go even to an extent to install your own hypervisor on that particular server, like KVM or VMware, and run your entire virtualization technology on it. Windows Virtual Desktop is one of the best features that will be released in this year. It is desktop as a service functionality that Microsoft is releasing. It can typically replace your RDS infrastructure completely, right? Today, you have to take care of your RDS gateway, your terminal server, your access server. With Windows Virtual Desktop, all these things will be removed. All you need to worry about is how many users are accessing, what type of applications are they accessing, right? So this is already in preview, expected to release sometime this year. Azure has now introduced a dedicated offering for VMware customers. If you have VMware customers who want to continue to use the VMware console, the VMware vSphere and vCenter, and want to use vMotion, vReplication, and all the good things about VMware on Azure, now it's possible. They can manage both on-prem and Azure using the same console. This is a very good offering, because as a IT of a customer, I don't need to learn a new technology. I can continue to manage both the resources, on-prem and Azure resources, using the same VMware tools that I'm familiar with, right? And of course, Azure has its Kubernetes service, which is very helpful when it comes to containerization. If you have customers who develop a lot of microservices application, who would want to use containers and Kubernetes service, well, Azure has you covered there as well. The last component of infrastructure as service is the storage, right? So Azure has various types of storage functionalities. It has disks, which is primarily used by your virtual machines, files, which is an SMB protocol enabled file storage service, blobs, which is again used by both virtual machines, but these days blobs are typically used to store your backup files or disaster recovery files or unstructured files like images and photos and documents and things like this. For developer community, we have tables and queues. Uh, Typically, tables and queues are used with applications such as mobile app development. If you have NoSQL database like MongoDB and things like this, that is where tables come in. Queues is first in, first out setup. So if you're again developing an e-commerce portal, queues is something that you'll probably end up using. So there are different types of storages available within Azure for different features and functionalities. When it comes to infrastructure as a service, I think the the storage marked as orange are the one that we would probably be using more and more. There are different types of disks available today. There is normal HDD, there is standard SSD, there is premium SSD, and very recently Microsoft has introduced something called as Ultra SSD. So a very high IOPS available within disks. Files is your network shared storage, right? You can attach file storage to multiple virtual machines and access the data across multiple virtual machines. Blobs, like I told you earlier, are typical storage used for backup files, disaster recovery, to store documents and images, or any of these files. You use the blob storage type. So before I continue on to upsell and cross-sell opportunities of how you can introduce Azure to your customers, um, uh, I hope everything that we have spoken so far is clear. I'd like to quickly summarize. We looked at what Azure is. We looked at the various data centers that Azure has. Approximately about 54 regions is what Microsoft has its data centers in. Within Australia, there are 4 data centers. We looked at some of the high-level services. We looked at what is the difference between platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. Then we went into deep dive on infrastructure as a service. We looked at networking components. We looked at compute components, and the final one was storage components. So again, if you have any questions, please do mention them in the chat. I will be looking at all your questions towards the end of the session. Also, if you would want to contact me offline, you always have my email address. I will share my email address again towards the end of the session. You can always drop me an email. Now let's get on to the interesting part of the session, which is how can I sell Azure to my customers? Now, we have created several bundle offers. And what we have seen from the time Azure has been in the market is typically my customers who would want to try Azure want to try in smaller bits and pieces, right? So one of the best ways to introduce Azure to your customer is via backup. I'm sure all your customers are using one or the other backup software today. Most of the popular backup softwares have Azure connectors. uh, Veeam has an Azure connector, Veritas, Commvault, DoubleTake, Datto, StorageCraft, all of them have cloud connectors available. One of the best parts about Azure storage is it is pay as you go, which means if you consume a terabyte of Azure storage, you would probably end up paying about $20 to $30 a month. So it's a very, very good entry point that you can position to your customers. In the upcoming sessions, as part of our Azure Accelerate webinar series, we will be specifically talking more on how we can integrate Veeam with Azure. Veeam is one of the most popular backup and replication software available in the market. We will look at how Veeam can provide you backup as a service, disaster recovery as a service with Azure. If you are a partner, especially a Microsoft partner, I'm sure you're selling a lot of Office 365. One of the best add-on solutions for Office 365 is backup of Office 365, right? People generally get confused in terms of why do I need a backup for Office 365? Microsoft only guarantees data availability. Microsoft never guarantees data recoverability. Please remember that. So it is still very, very important to back up your Office 365 data. And the good part with Veeam is it lets you back up Office 365 and use Azure storage. So you as a partner can benefit by selling Office 365 backup and getting recognized for Azure consumption as well. The same backup story that Veeam has is also provided by NetApp. NetApp has a SaaS solution, a cloud SaaS solution, which can back up all your Office 365 and Salesforce data and store it onto Azure storage. So do get in touch with us if you want to understand more about how this can be done. We also have disaster recovery solutions. Typically, not a lot of customers that we come across have disaster recovery setup. One, because they think it is very complicated, very expensive. With Azure Site Recovery, it is a very affordable and a very effective world-class service that you can use to set up disaster recovery for physical, for VMware, or for Hyper-V setup. It works across all the three infrastructures. If you already have customers who are on Azure, we can definitely help them with security. So security is something that a lot of partners sell as managed services to their customers, right? Uh, if you want to make sure that the right users are accessing, if you want to develop certain reporting functionality on customers using Azure, or if they want to monitor their on-premise infrastructure. Azure Monitor is a service that is available in Azure that can not only monitor and give you reporting of Azure resources, but also on-prem resources. So this can definitely act as an add-on to your managed services offering that you provide to your customers. And the last but not the least is migration. Azure now has introduced features that does assessment of your on-prem network. It gives you a report, it gives you cost estimation, and it also tells you which tools and technologies to use to do the migration, right? So it has Azure Migrate service, it has Site Recovery, which does both disaster recovery and migration. If you have customers who are having huge amount of file server data and are looking at options to move to cloud, Azure File Sync is another service to look at. And of course, we can always help you doing a lift and shift migration. So as you can see, there are so many various combinations. There are so many different options available with Azure, and by combining Azure with other products, right, like VMware, like Veeam, NetApp, Commvault, DoubleTake, Veritas. There are so many other things that we can integrate Azure with and introduce them to your customers. Let us go into a little more deeper into some of these solutions. So we spoke about Veeam, right? So Veeam is one of the most popular tools. Veeam 9.5 Update 4 has introduced of special features called as scale out repository. Typically, in earlier days, if you want to archive any data, customers used to typically put it onto tape drives. Tape drives are never reliable. There are so many concerns, so many data loss issues that we have seen over the years. Microsoft and Veeam have worked together, and now with Veeam, you can actually create a simple rule that can push your data from your on-premise storage to Azure. You can create a policy saying any data older than 2 years, any data older than 3 years, or one day can move to Azure. So it is a seamless integration available within Veeam itself, and it works very seamlessly with Azure Blob Storage. Also, Azure Blob Storage is one of the cheapest Azure storage options available. Veeam also provides you an option of Office 365 backup. This is just a quick representation of how this Veeam backup works. We can install the software on Azure. It can connect to your Office 365 and everything of Office 365. It's not just backing up your Exchange. It can back up Exchange, Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, all this data, and you can store it on Azure. The good part is it is a cloud to cloud backup and restore mechanism, which means nothing affects your on-prem network. The recovery time is very fast. And the best part is Veeam gives you a service provider model also, which means you can install Veeam backup once, and the same setup can be shared by multiple customers, and one customer does not see the data of the other customer. So all these various functionalities are now available with Veeam and Azure combined. The last option that I want to quickly talk about in terms of bundles is migration. This is a very, very important slide to remember. Windows 2008 and 2008 R2 or SQL 2008 and 2008 R2 are very, very close to end of support. SQL is already past the end of support, so if you have customers who are using SQL 2000 or 2000, I'm sorry, 2008 and 2008 R2, they will not receive any security updates and patches, which means they are a potential target for hackers, for ransomware attacks now. Now, if these customers want to make sure that they are safeguarded by any of these attacks or data loss, then the best option is migrate these database to Azure or migrate the SQL Server 2008 or 2008 R2 to Azure. Why? Because on Azure, if you run these SQL on Azure, Microsoft is giving you 3 years extended security updates, right? So to make it clear, if you run it on premise, no security update. If you run them the same software on Azure, there is security updates for the next 3 years. And next 3 years is enough time for a customer to plan their upgrade strategy, right? So save them from data loss, save them from ransomware attacks, propose them a migration to Azure. And as a value-added distributor, Ingram Micro is more than happy to assist you in doing this migration, in helping you build a solution, build a plan, and present it to your customer. So quickly looking at some of the ways that Ingram Micro can help you sell Azure. Ingram Micro has a dedicated Azure program that we are running across Australia, right? It's a program that will help you build a profitable business by doing or by selling cloud products, right? And specifically Azure. We are also launching a new promotion. So if you have new customers who would want to move to Azure, we are giving them options where if you move them to Azure and if their monthly consumption is close to 1,000, we are ready to reimburse $500 for it, right? Please click on this link. I will be sharing this presentation after the session to all the attendees. Go through the link. It's a very, very tailored program that we have. You get benefits such as training, you get benefits such as better pricing, you get a dedicated support from Ingram and from Microsoft. So do look into it. We have several partners already part of this program and taking benefit of it. But I would encourage a lot many more of you to join this particular program and take the benefit of it. We also have dedicated people running this program. We have Gaurav, who is the business development manager. We have John, who's the account manager, and myself, who takes care of the technical aspects of the Azure implementation and configuration. These are some of the other services that you can get as part of Azure Accelerate or by working with Ingram Micro. As a special offer for Azure Accelerate customers, we are giving something called as a starter pack valued at $500. For this $500, what do you get, or what does your customer get? Your customer gets a free assessment of his on-prem infrastructure. We will tell him which applications are ready for Azure, which applications are not yet ready, and what needs to be changed. We will create him an Azure CSP subscription from our cloud marketplace. We will set up a hybrid connectivity, which means we will make sure his network is cloud ready, so that tomorrow if he wants to move an application or set up a backup or set up a disaster recovery with Azure, all his prerequisites are taken care. We will set up an active directory for him on Azure, and we will give a very high level training on what Azure is. We will run him through the portal, help him create certain things, and make sure he has enough idea to start now looking into the options of moving his applications to cloud. All these things are available to you as a partner for $500. This is not subscription based. It is a one-time buy. You pay $500 and you get all these services from Ingram. But this is only available to Azure Accelerate partners. I would encourage you to subscribe and sign up to Azure Accelerate today to avail this. Apart from this, we do give you pre-sale support right from demand generation. We do a lot of customer presentations. Customer presentation means a partner can get his customers into a room, into a conference, and we as Ingram can position and enable their customers to understand Azure, where and how it can fit. We can even develop custom scenarios based on your whatever your customers are using and help you reduce your sales cycle. We do presentations, we do demos and POCs as well, depending on your requirement. We have dedicated team called as lifecycle services team who can help you with migration, development, deployment of anything on Azure, right from virtual machines to chatbots to SQL, all the way up to development on Azure can be done by our team, and we are offering this all to the partners for Australian region. Last, these are some of the upcoming sessions that we have planned. The very next session we'll be talking about Veeam and Azure. Then we have end of support. How can you move your Windows and SQL to Azure? What are the options in Azure? How you can reduce your cost in Azure? How can you migrate them? What are the various options? We'll also look at disaster recovery scenarios for physical, for VMware, for Hyper-V, all these various setups. And we also have a session on Windows Virtual Desktop, something that can replace your RDS setup is Windows Virtual Desktop. We have all these sessions upcoming. Again, all these sessions are primarily for the Azure Accelerate partners. So get registered and get enabled on all these various sessions. Before we close the session, I would want to remind all of you to register for our Cloud Summit. This is one of the biggest events of 2019. We have Ingram Micro Cloud Summit happening in October. We have it in 2 cities, in Sydney and Melbourne. Over 20 vendors are participating in them. Of course, Azure or Microsoft would be there. It's one of the easiest ways to interact with a vendor. Address your queries to them. There will be keynote sessions, there will be breakout sessions done by the vendors as well. So one of the best events happening for 2019. Go ahead, register, seats are filling up, and get access to this Cloud Summit that we are doing. So that's it that I have for today's session. I hope it was informative. I hope it was helpful. Let me quickly check the questions now. But for customers and partners who do not have any questions, thank you very much for joining today's session. I hope it was helpful and useful. I'd like to leave the session by providing you the link for our Azure Accelerate and the contact details of myself and Gaurav, who is the Business Development Manager. Please do get in touch with us if you have any questions or queries, and we'll be more than happy to help you to the best of our abilities. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for attending the session, and have a great day ahead.